Good morning, everyone, and welcome for tuning in to the IMHC Virtual Luncheon. This is Steve Scoop Jefferson, your moderator for the day, and we will begin our program in 5 minutes.
We begin this morning with breaking news. Metro Police investigating multiple acts of violence across the city.
The violence in and around the Circle City leaves 5 people dead.
New violence downtown continues to be a problem.
There have been 75 murders so far this year in Indianapolis.
658. That's the number of people who have died from gunshot wounds in Marion County over the last 5.5 years.
There's been a lot of young people getting killed, like teenagers and stuff killing each other, so it's like, gotta be extra careful.
I'm the mother of 3 sons, so in the forefront of my mind every time my kids leave the house is, will they make it home safe?
I'm a victim of domestic violence. I've been a victim in both forms, mentally and physically. They both are real.
You know, just being, part of the African American community, unfortunately, it's just an experience that far too many of us have to encounter.
Unfortunately, one night, my son heard a loud noise, heard someone moaning, and someone was basically shot probably around the corner from our house, actually.
I personally witnessed a shooting on my street. I live on a quiet street, but we had neighbors that didn't live the same way we did, and they literally had a shootout between a car and the house next door to me, not down the street, but literally the house next door to me.
Just like our communities have been disproportionately affected by violence, it's also been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So I think those patterns and those trends reflect pretty much what we've seen and what we've known for decades.
That doesn't have to be our narrative. You don't have to die before you're 21. You don't have to die at the hands of somebody else.
As a young person, it honestly makes me concerned and very fearful for my future because it doesn't seem like there's an end or a solution in sight.
The responsibility for coming up with solutions falls in the lap of everyone.
We have got to do something about us hurting us.
If we don't do something about violence, then our future generation is going to pretty much be in non-existence.
We need those people that are successful African Americans to come back into the African American community and help. And I don't think it's something that white people can totally, they're not our saviors. They can't change us, they can't help us. We're gonna have to figure this out ourselves if we really want change. And I can't say they don't want to help or change us, but in the end, they get kind of tired. It's not their problem, it's ours, and it's up to us to do something about it.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for the 24th Annual Minority Health Initiative Luncheon. Yes, we're virtual this year. My name is Emmy Award-winning reporter Steve Jefferson. I'm a crime reporter with 13 News, and this conversation about violence couldn't come at a better time because in our city, October, November, and December are the most violent months of the year. The Indiana Minority Health Coalition works to address health disparities experienced by racial and ethnic minorities in Indiana. Although IMHC is an advocacy organization with a focus on health, they understand that social and economic issues have a direct impact on our health and our overall well-being. Due to the recent events in our country, racism and its effects, and how it's now being linked to public health in cities around the nation beginning to declare racism as a public health crisis. Recently, Indianapolis passed a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis in Marion County. IMHC is in agreement and supports that racism is a public health crisis impacting all aspects of accessing and receiving quality care services. Past health concerns have included infant mortality, cancer, health with our hearts, diabetes, and obesity, and that's just to name a few. With so much happening in our world today, it is difficult to focus on any one issue during these challenging times, but we must focus on the recent injustices that are occurring all around the country that interfere with people's right to live free, fulfilling, healthy lives. Today, we plan to involve you in a very informative conversation around the impact of violence on minority communities in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you our amazing panelists today. You're going to learn a lot from them because they're bringing their expertise to the table. I would like to first introduce Ida Rodriguez. Ida, thank you for joining us, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and also tell us about your favorite part of social media.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Happy to be here and such the presence of such beautiful melanin. I don't apologize for that. And so I'm a stand-up comedian. I am a contributor to Okay, is that gone now? Okay, sorry. There was a lot of feedback. I'm a stand-up comedian, a contributor on the Young Turks. I'm a writer, a producer. And my favorite part of social media is that my father, who I hadn't seen since I was 5, was able to find me on social media.
This is Dr. Lakeisha Legree, and she would like to also say a few words. And we want to know from you, what surprises you most about social media?
Absolutely. So good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Dr. Lakeisha Legree. I hail from the Midwest in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm the daughter of State Senator Lonnie Randolph. And I think what surprises me most about social media, and I hope you all can still hear me because I just had a blackout on my screen, but it's talking about how you can reach people through social media, not just marketing with respect to product sales, but from a medical perspective. I'm a huge advocate of mental health, and being able to use social media to check in with people's mind state, particularly during COVID and particularly during this period of so much violence, has been huge. So that's what I love about social media now.
All right, thank you, Dr. Legree. Our next panelist is Dr. Michael Dotson, who's not only joining us from a different part of the country, but also another time zone. Dr. Dotson, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what you like most about social media.
Well, peace and good morning. It is early on this West Coast, and I have this delicious cup of coffee to keep me going here. So I'm Dr. Milo Dotson, currently in Los Angeles, but a proud alumni of the University of Notre Dame. Go Irish. Lots of support for all my Black alumni during this time. My favorite part of social media is that, especially when we're navigating a pandemic, it allows folks to feel socially connected while we remain physically distant. So even when I was in grad school, when I was in Illinois for grad school, Black Twitter was a beautiful, beautiful place for me to be able to connect with other folks across the country and across the world. So I think during this time and during this time of righteous civil unrest as well, it gives me a sense of connection, and it improves my mental health by helping me recognize that I'm not alone during these times.
All right, thank you, Dr. Dotson, and thank you to all of our panelists for taking this time out of your active schedules to be part of this event, to share your thoughts, your experiences, and your expertise with us today. At the end of today's luncheon, we encourage you to share your thoughts on today's topics by completing our survey. That's very important, and we would like for you to do that. The survey link is available on your screen as well as listed in the live chat comments section. In addition to these amazing panelists, we also have some special guests joining us for today's event. We also have some videos that we want you to see, and we have a few surprises for you as well, so stay with us. But before I introduce messages from our special guests and jump into our much-awaited panel discussion, let me take this time to thank IMHC, IMHC's Board of Directors, IMHC's local Minority Health Coalition and affiliates, and community-based organization partners. These organizations provide invaluable services year in and year out to our minority communities throughout the entire state of Indiana, so we're very thankful for that. We will now hear a special message from our very own Indiana Congressman, Andre Carson.
Hello, this is Congressman Andre Carson. I'm very honored I was asked to be a panelist on this year's Indiana Minority Health Coalition Luncheon. Though regrettably, changes to the congressional calendar prevent me from participating fully in this event, I still wanted to send this message to show my gratitude for the important work that you all do. You know, 2020 has been a very challenging year, and it's been exceptionally challenging for minority communities. We're facing dual epidemics of violence and COVID-19 on top of the systemic disparities in our community, like infant and maternal mortality, diabetes, vascular diseases, and mental health. However, through this adversity, we are finding the strength to make big changes. Conversations like the one being held today are the catalyst for ideas and actions to address these problems and improve lives. I pledge to continue working closely with you all to ensure healthier, safer, and more prosperous minority communities across Indiana and our country. Once again, thanks to IMHC's leadership, board, and advocates, as well as today's panelists and participants, for working hard to help get us through these very extremely challenging times and into a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre Carson. Violence disproportionately affects vulnerable populations such as racial and ethnic minorities, women, children, individuals living in poverty, and the LGBTQ community as well. We will specifically address violence that occurs in the context of domestic and relational violence, law enforcement and police violence, yes, that happens too, firearm and community violence, and the impact of violence on mental health and addictions. It is now my pleasure to share a special message from Indiana Senator Todd Young.
Hello, I'm Senator Todd Young. Thank you for inviting me to today's Indiana Minority Health Coalition virtual luncheon. As you've been discussing, we're in the midst of a dual health crisis. A global pandemic known as COVID-19, and an epidemic of violence in our communities. Both of these threats are killing Black Hoosiers at a disproportionately high rate. That breaks my heart. African Americans have worse health outcomes across the board. Many of the health issues I was working on before COVID-19, like raising the smoking age, addressing infant and maternal mortality, and more, also have a greater impact on Black Americans. This is due in large part to lingering effects of racism and inequity that dates back decades. This should not be so. The inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are God-given rights for all people, not a select few. I wish I could announce today that I have all the answers. What I do have is an open door and an eagerness to partner with you to ensure Black men, women, and children have the opportunity to live long, healthy lives. As you discuss these issues today, let me know how I can help. Help build consensus in Washington and deliver bipartisan solutions to these challenging and long-standing problems. Thanks so much. Stay healthy, and God bless.
When you talk about violence, you may have a few questions that you want to answer. So we're going to encourage you to remember, use our chat feature if you have a question for our panelists, and no question is off limits, okay? So even if they can't find an answer for you today, we'll get an answer to your question. So we're going to go ahead and start with some of our questions. And our first question is, could you tell me and those who are tuned in a bit about yourself and your community involvement during these uncertain times of the pandemic? And we're going to pose that question to, let's go with Dr. Dotson. Why don't you
Right. So, morning again. There we go. All right. So, good morning, everyone. So again, my name is Dr. Milo. Really excited and honored to be a part of this panel, to connect with everyone virtually here. One of the helpful aspects that I've actually been able to use technology is to not just do consultation, but to really allow for more therapy to take place throughout the state. So as a psychologist in California, I'm able to now connect with folks while I'm physically in Southern California to students who may be at home on summer vacation in Northern California. Additionally, I think being at home in this space has allowed me to be still and to really focus on my own healing and to connect with my fiance in a really special way. One of my mentors often talks about the fastest way to get somewhere is to be still. And I think when we're continuing to stay at home, to quarantine, I really encourage folks to kind of focus on their mental health and their healing, because we are in so many ways in unprecedented times. We're simultaneously managing the global pandemic of COVID and the 400 plus year plague of racism. And so again, I really appreciate being able to connect with folks in a virtual space and to provide some of that healing that way.
All right, and Ida Rodriguez, you want to answer the same question?
Yes. I had to unmute myself. My job, my work has been significantly, it's non-existent at this point because live performance has just been, it's gone because of COVID. And that is usually a way that I interact with communities and have an opportunity to reach out to people in marginalized communities, because I provide tickets and laughter for people who are having tough times, because I believe that laughter is healing. But one of the things that I'm focusing on is trying to be more active on the ground and in real life as opposed to social media, because I think that social media can be intoxicating. And sometimes you think you're doing a lot because you're talking a lot on social media and not really doing things on the ground. So when the COVID epidemic or pandemic came about, I know that a lot of people who sew, who are Black and brown, lost their jobs. And they were sewing from home to make masks as to be good partners and neighbors to people in their communities. So I raised money to supplement the incomes of some of those people who lost their jobs, who lose their jobs first and whose communities are affected the most. I also am in the works of creating with some people who are experts in the financial fields to workshops and programs to help people in our community learn the literacy of money and understand how money works in our communities, and to really focus on helping us understand that a lot of times we are funding our own oppression. So that's what my focus is, specifically when it comes to women of color, Black women. And one of the things that I am really focusing on as a mother of 2 Black children, considering myself an Afro-Latin woman, is that normalizing the word Black, capitalizing the word Black, and not being afraid to say the word Black, because I think that that is part of the indoctrination of keeping people oppressed. And it is important for us to be within my own Latin community, Latinx community, not being afraid to say the word Black, because I think that too is healing. So those are the things that I'm focusing on, because we know we can't change the world. So I just try to do my own part in my own little habitat.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Legree, tell us a little bit about yourself and how your involvement in the community during the pandemic.
Afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Dr. Lakeisha Legree, and I live currently in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I was born and raised in the Midwest, in Northwest Indiana, East Chicago to be specific. I am just thankful for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to give a small shout out to my father, whose demonstration of advocacy for our community is where I get it from. He's State Senator Lonnie Randolph, District 2. He's been in the Senate for a long time now. I won't shout his age out. But nevertheless, I have done 3 things organically during this pandemic. Initially, I am a trained anesthesiologist, so I am a first responder. And so when patients come in who have COVID or suspected COVID who need surgical procedures, I'm the face that they see, or one of the many faces that they see. Which brings me to my second hat that came organically. Being a first responder, there's often a lack of PPE, as was a discussion in last night's debate. So having to show up to take care of my community, all of you, and not having the proper equipment to protect myself and my daughter at home and my husband, made me extremely angry. So I took matters into my own hands. I created a 501c3. It's called Help Mask a Hero. I donate N95 masks across the country to physicians and nurses and first responders who are in need of protection so that we can continue to help our community and literally save lives. But in order to save your life, we have to save our own. So if you are a first responder and you need a mask, or if you are a manufacturer or a business owner and you have access to masks, please donate. You can go to helpmaskahero.com. We are always in need of these as well as the blue kind. And then finally, I am an advocate for mental illness and mental health. I like using the term health in the what I call high functioning community. So there are a lot of people who have high demand jobs who are always on, such as physicians, attorneys, business owners, professional athletes, people who society would deem you have nothing to be depressed about. Well, guess what? We're human too. And when you are a Black woman, a Black female physician in the midst of violence towards your Black men, it's trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And so depression and suicide has increased post-COVID-19. And I own a clinic that specializes in a medication called ketamine, which is an anesthetic that treats depression and suicidality within a time frame of 2 weeks. And that's probably about the maximum amount of time that people who are in high demand, high functioning professions have to get better before they take a permanent action for a temporary solution in the form of suicide. My clinic is called Elevate MD Wellness Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I wear a bunch of hats, and I'm a mama and I'm a wife.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Legree, and thank you for what you do as well. Now, we are going to have probably some technical issues, but we're going to push through those and ask you to stick with us because we've got some great information that you don't want to miss. And we also want to remind you to use the chat feature if you have a question for our panelists. Now, let's talk about the notable change we've seen across the country since the onset of COVID-19, particularly in the regards of the uptick of violence. Now, we're not talking about the protests that we've seen across the country, that violence. We're talking about the violence that we've seen in our community. As a crime reporter, when the pandemic first started, I can recall the first week when the country started to go on lockdown. We did see some slowdown in violent crime, but then all of a sudden it seems as though the violence in our community just exploded here in Marion County especially. So we want to know, how has violence evolved during the pandemic? How have you seen it evolved? And we'll start with Ida. Do you want to take that question for us? Question for us? Question for us? Question for us? Question for us?
Violence. I feel like I'm doing a remix to a song. Sorry, it just keeps repeating itself. So when we unpack violence in our communities, I guess we have to honor history. We have to talk about the foundation of things, because these things that are happening are reactions to things that have been there for a very long time. And any opportunity that the media has to highlight violence in our communities, they do, where violence lives in all communities daily. And you don't hear about white on white crime. I mean, I don't believe in that black on black crime term, because it only exists when we speak about black people. You don't hear Asian on Asian crime. Anytime that there is economic crisis, crime goes up, because people in the communities who have the proverbial foot on their necks are struggling already to begin with. When they don't have access to great education, there is oppression in the real estate. They are enclosed in communities that lack resources. Crime is a result of that, because people have to survive. And it's sometimes we sit in these places of privilege and we look down on those people. But those of us who come from those communities, I come from a very impoverished community in Miami, know that when one of us gets out, it's not because we pulled ourselves up by the bootstrap, but usually because a village surrounded us and enabled us to be able to get out. So crime, of course, it has gone up in our communities in this time. People have lost their jobs. People are losing their lives to a pandemic that was mishandled. And it was mishandled because most of the people being affected by the pandemic are Black and brown and in marginalized communities, and they come last on the list of priorities. So domestic violence is going to increase when people are at home, because people who have issues with domestic violence are not getting the proper treatment. It's very difficult to think about going to get a therapist when you don't have food in the refrigerator. So all of these things are connected. And so, yes, there's been a rise of crime. But, you know, we are also in the age of social media, where a lot of things that have existed and been existing are being highlighted now because people have access and can peer into the communities that have been invisible for so long. So I have seen a spike in crime in places like New York, because New York's crime rate has significantly gone down since the 70s. But now here we are again, where people are losing their jobs. They don't have resources. Unemployment is not available. They're playing a game with stimulus versus unemployment. There's only a grace period where people are given for not paying their rent and their mortgage. So what do you think is going to happen when the resources are low and the pressure is high? You're going to see people react. And when people don't have an education and don't have the tools and the resources to deal with their anger, the way that they react is, unfortunately, sometimes through crime.
Dr. Milo, what's been your observation when it comes to crime and violence during the pandemic?
My observation is now other people can see what's been happening in our communities for a long time as a result of systemic oppression. That is what my reaction to it is. I'm not shocked. I'm not surprised. It has been in our communities for a long time. We are now center stage because people have access to our communities. You can see George Floyd be murdered, and you get to encounter it for the entire 8 minutes and 46 seconds, when many of us grew up around George Floyd's and have been seeing that our whole lives. And what we discount, this is my observation, is that we discount how this affects the psyche, how embedding these messages into the subconscious minds of our children is what creates our very own ISIS, if you will. And not to justify or condone violence, but to really understand where it comes from, is that it has always been here. And now other people are finally getting a chance to see the communities that we live in that have been structured the way that they've been structured, so that for profit for the top 1%, and for the continuation of systemic oppression, and for the continuation of this racist country that we've lived in, these are the results. And we want to take count of these numbers and say, oh, wow, there's a spike in crime. Well, why don't we talk about how there shouldn't be crime in the first place? Because if people had the resources, we wouldn't have to be observing when it goes up and down, and how we talk about eradicating it by dealing with mental health issues when it comes to people of color, Black people in America.
All right, thank you. Dr. Milo, what have you seen during the pandemic when it comes to crime and violence?
I honestly just want to give a shout out to Ida, because I'm just like sitting here like, dang, I'm probably gonna have to say something next in a second, but I just really appreciated what she was sharing. For me as a psychologist, what I've noticed is that either from the clients that I've worked with directly or other consultations, what I've heard out there is that there is an increase in domestic violence. And that's not even just within the communities of color, that's not just within the states, but that's actually a global reflection of what people have been going through. And so similar to what had been shared earlier, sometimes what Black people experience gets put under a microscope, not balanced with people knowing that this is actually a global occurrence right now. And then so somehow it's like, well, in the Black community or in the brown community, and it's not understood as like, hey, this is something that people are going through. So I think domestic violence is also a reflection of toxic masculinity. It's also a reflection of increased substance use. And it's also a reflection of our inability at times to really manage conflict and tension in a healthy way. And so I think there needs to be more of an emphasis on encouraging folks with conflict resolution, to be able to encourage folks to have more of a mental health skill set, and to really normalize and validate that we're all going through this really, really scary time. And it's understandable that you are feeling anxious. It's understandable that you're feeling afraid. And that still doesn't justify you taking that anger out on somebody else. All of these together to be addressed. And again, to Ida's point, there needs to be resources, because folks tend to like to point fingers without actually understanding the historical context that leads to these concerns in the first place. And again, if we're looking at things historically, we know that systemic racism has existed for longer than this country has been a country. We also know that folks are still dealing with 400 plus years of trying to overcome traumatic symptoms of slavery and traumatic symptoms of racism. So I'm all for having conversations about violence and what's been going on over the last 6-7 months. But we can't lose sight of what's been going on historically, and that our almost part of the identity of our country is grounded in violence that wasn't from Black people. That violence is largely connected to white supremacy and white nationalism, which is what exactly we continue to see happening to communities of color today.
All right, thank you, Dr. Milo. Right now, we're watching the country actually make history, under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter. So a lot of cities are holding demonstrations, and we're seeing a lot of protests. I just got back from Louisville, Kentucky for the Breonna Taylor case. I went to Minneapolis for the George Floyd case, and both cities are having huge protests. And right now, there's a huge question, because a lot of the protesters are being ridiculed for gathering and not using social distancing during the pandemic. What is your take on protesting racism, systemic racism, versus gathering and taking the risks during this pandemic? And Dr. Legree, we'll let you start there, since you are on the front line dealing with people who come to your hospital who may have COVID. What is your take on that?
So I think you can do both. There's nothing that says you have to choose one or the other. I think it's important for our community to stand up for the injustices that we have so long faced, and to not just stand up, but to educate and to disseminate information as to what the etiology or the core of the current climate in the country is. I mean, like Dr. Milo was saying, you know, a lot of people are shining the spotlight on our community almost as if they're pointing fingers, when at the end of the day, it has to do with the lack of information, a lack of knowledge, and a lack of understanding. But on the flip side, the opposite, the majority, you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to learn. You can't just stand back and offer help. You actually have to be able to relate. And by relating, you are open to understanding. And by understanding, then perhaps you will have more of a sense of urgency to provide the resources that are needed to level the playing field that was never leveled initially, which is one of the reasons why there's such an imbalance now that directly leads to an increase in violence that you see. So yes, by all means, if it is in your heart to protest, protest. However, from a clinical standpoint, do so safely. What does that mean? That means wearing a mask. I don't care what you hear or who you hear it from on mainstream television. A mask will reduce your risk of contracting COVID-19 by more than 90%. If you are in the midst of someone who also has a mask on, you have a mask, they have a mask, your risk is almost a 3% chance of contracting the virus. Why do we wear a mask? It's to protect your exposure from what's called airborne droplets. What the heck is an airborne droplet? If someone sneezes in your direction, coughs in your direction, or sometimes people are animated when they talk, and you can have invisible droplets of saliva that spew into the air just during a basic conversation. So wearing a mask not only protects you, but it also protects the person standing near you. Now, the 6 feet comes from how far the aerosolized droplet can travel to 10 feet. So honestly, I really don't know where the magic number of 6 came from, but the point is, have enough distance between you and the next person. So can a gathering take place? Yes. How should it take place? Safely, by wearing a mask and by keeping distance between yourself, because even if you are young and healthy, listen, you can still contract it. I've signed death certificates of people with no other comorbidities, meaning other health issues, and they've succumbed to the virus. Don't believe the hype that melanated people cannot get it. We can, and we have. And more importantly, because we're such a culture that cares for our elderly population, many of us grew up with our grandparents perhaps living with us, you want to wear a mask so that when you go home, you are not exposing the people who live in your household to the virus. So the answer to the question is yes, you can do both, but you have to do it smart.
All right, thank you, Dr. Legree. Now, Dr. Milo, I want you to listen to this, and I want you to react first, and then we'll have Ida react secondly. The George Floyd video, it had an impact on the entire world like no other video in my lifetime. So, Dr. Milo and Ida, when you hear that 1 in 1,000 chance, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance of being murdered at the hands of police if you're a black man, and that black Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of whites. When you hear that, what is your reaction? How does that impact you?
Oof. So going back a couple months when George Floyd was murdered at the hands of the police, I vividly remember later that day or maybe later that week, I cried, and I had, I worked earlier in the day, had clients earlier in the day, and at some point my fiance came home, going to the grocery store or whatever, and I just cried. And so when I hear that as a statistic, I find myself feeling maybe a little bit confused, or at the very least, like that statistic can point out or kind of like misconstrue a lot of the experiences that Black men, that Black trans women experience at the hands of the police. Having been a survivor of police brutality at the age of 15 myself, that's a difficult statistic for me to wrap my head and my heart around. And the researcher in me wants to know a little bit more about the research methodology behind that. But to get to the second part, you know, the incarceration rates, I think, are sometimes also misconstrued to be reflective of like, well, this means that Black people are more likely to be criminals, or that this means that Black people, brown people are inherently bad or evil, or however we want to chop it up. And so I think realistically, though, again, the methodology of how they get there is that they are disproportionately targeted and persecuted in communities. So a number is a number, and sure, numbers don't lie, but it also depends on who's interpreting these numbers. And more so, just like with any good research methodology, the intent and the purpose of that study and the intent and the purpose behind those statistics. So again, going back to your question there, good brother, it's difficult for me to, like I said, wrap my head and my heart around that. Knowing the experience that I have, knowing the experience that a lot of my clients, I run a Black men's group at UC Irvine called Wabruta, which is Swahili for brotherhood. And yeah, I don't know. Ida, I know you're gonna be up next year, so maybe you can help us out, because I'm struggling with that, sister.
I can imagine. I just want to quickly just say something, because I think that Dr. Legree is, I'm so glad that you're here, because I invited people to listen to this. I have to hear these conspiracy theorists all the time talking about these masks and, you know, feeding our communities with this stuff about it not being real. And you never hear anybody in history criticizing the people from the Boston Tea Party for spreading tuberculosis. You never hear that they were being reckless in that fight. We only hear about them being heroes for standing up in what they believe in. And with regards to the current question, I will just say this: toxic capitalism. Black people in this country have always been a currency. They've never been fully realized human beings, no matter how much it is in the language of politics. The 3/5 of a human being, it feels like it is still in effect. You talk about a group of people who worked for 400 years for free in this country, 400 years. And they still mad about it because so much money was generated. We sit here and gawk at these billionaires thinking that they acquired this wealth by work ethic, and they acquired the wealth by the work ethic of Black people who were stolen and brought here for 400 years and worked for free and built an economy and so much wealth, and all of the structures that we sit around and we look at the White House built by slaves. So when we talk about prison and the student, the child, the Black child, school to prison pipeline, it is all about money, because no one is speaking the reality about how Black people in this country, brown people in this country, are not seen as fully realized human beings. That is why children can die in cages, choking on their vomit. You see dead parents who crossing the river trying to get here to freedom. Mind you, the people coming to this country because we've destabilized their governments and created chaos in their countries, and they're fleeing here for a refuge. So these conversations that we have when we talk about Black men, Black women, trans human beings being murdered by cops, and then you talk about the Latinx people who are also killed by cops that are undocumented and don't report it because they don't want to deal with the consequences of deportation. There is a gross misuse of abuse when it comes to Black and brown bodies in this country, because they are not seen as fully realized human beings, which is why people are shocked to see a Dr. Dotson and a Dr. Legree and say, wow, you're one of the smart ones, or because they don't see us as human beings, which is why it's okay for a cop to jump on a 12-year-old girl in a bikini, because they don't see her as a fully realized human being. So when we talk about prison and the murders of Black people that go without consequence, where you get banned on the internet for speaking about something political, but you can watch a Black person get murdered online, it's because there is an attitude towards Black and brown people in this country that exempts them of their full humanity. So when we talk about this toxic capitalism, which is intertwined, the white supremacy and capitalism go hand in hand. And it is a global issue. You know, they like to say America, but it is all over the world. You talk about the Dutch, the French, the British, they all stole Black people from Africa, told Black people, y'all sold yourselves into slavery, which is, you know, blaming Black people for their own oppression, and it's become part of the conversations that we have. Black people are in prison because it is a way to continue slavery without consequence. If you you take away resources from the community, people resort to violence or crime because they are lacking in education and resources. And then you justify it by putting them in prison, and then you got them putting out fires in California and making license plates and getting 2 pennies on the hour. It is all going hand in hand. And unless we are willing to have a real conversation about how capitalism is affecting the communities of color in this country, we can't talk about the truth. And I'm not endorsing, because you have to be so clear now, I'm not endorsing communism or socialism. Mind you, we have a mixed economy in this country where socialism exists, but it only benefits the people at the top percent. Our tax dollars pay for senators and community leaders to have they have the best health care, their children have access to the best education. But when you want to talk about public health care for people who don't have those resources, there's a fight, because all of a sudden we're trying to turn America into Cuba. So when we talk about what's happening with our prison systems, it is part of this capitalistic, oppressive system that is set up in this country and has been here since the beginning of time.
Thank you for those comments. Dr. Legree, listen to this. When asked how America would look with defunded police, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, and I quote, "It looks like a suburb, affluent with white communities already living in a world where they choose to fund youth, health, housing, and other programs more than they fund the police. The communities have lower crime rates, not because they have more police, but because they have more resources to support a healthy society in a way that reduces crime." When you hear that, Dr. Legree, what goes through your mind?
A plethora of emotions. Anger that we are still here. Disbelief that we are still here. When I say we are still here, I'm talking about remembering stories being told to me by my great-grandmother, rest her soul, where she would clean the floors of white people and come home to a community with a lack of resources and go to the second job and the third job and the fourth job, riding the public transit system only to put 2 pennies together to feed her family. And here we are. Notice I said great-grandmother, and I am older than I look. And I can't believe that in 2020, we are still facing the same issues that she faced. And I, as a mom, am nervous. I'm afraid. I think it's ridiculous that I'm having to figure out how to have conversations with an 8-year-old child about racial issues in our country. Particularly about perhaps what she is being exposed to by other children of majority races who are being taught certain things by their parents, because hate is learned, it's not innate. So it's really a whole vast of emotions, but I think the biggest part that I want my community to understand is that emotions are okay. We have gone through so many things. We as a race have endured so much. I challenge anybody to find cultures that have endured what the minority communities have endured. But because of that, it's a double-edged sword. We are raised to keep putting one foot in front of the other, to do what you have to do to make ends meet, to by any means necessary. And sometimes you do so at the expense of your own mental health. And I'm not saying go out and get an expensive therapist. No, I'm talking about not being afraid to talk to your homeboy, your homegirl, your grandmother, your auntie, your uncle, whomever, about dark thoughts that you might be having. Because if you don't keep those thoughts together in your mind, then in addition to the social issues that we're facing, that you're having to scrub two pieces of pennies together to make ends meet, you're also dealing with the demons that are between your two ears. And those two compounded upon each other will exacerbate your need to release that in whatever form or fashion that comes out. And in some instances, it's violence, whether that's violence against each other, or whether that's domestic violence, or whether that's violence to put food on the table. Either way, it's important as a community that we destigmatize discussions about anger, about hate, about depression, about anxiety, because all of us, I don't care who you are, I don't care what your bank account says, because of what we've experienced collectively as a culture, we all fall on the spectrum of post-traumatic stress disorder on some way, form, or fashion. And so therapy is really communication. So I implore our community to stop looking at someone as weak. I know a lot of my guys out there watch Sports Center or watch Sports One or whatever that Fox Sports channel is with Skip Bayless. He doesn't even deserve me to get his name right. For him to say that someone who talks about mental health, talks about their experience with depression, is considered less than, is considered weak, is considered not a leader, shame on you. Because what you're doing is you're telling all of these little brown and black girls and boys who look up to these sports figures that, hey, in order for you to excel, whether it's in athletics or whether it's in other professions, you can't be true to yourself and express your emotions. So you basically open the door for more people to suffer in silence. So again, a mix of emotions, but I can't stress enough that we have to talk to each other because, as Ida said before, it takes a village. It takes a village.
All right, thank you, Dr. Legree. You know, when I first heard the term defund the police, I had to go look it up. And depending on who I had the conversation with about defunding the police, it meant different things to different people. Ida, I would like for you to expound on the fact that should we say restructuring the police? Because when you say defund, you know, that could mean a whole lot of things to a whole lot of different people. What's your take on the terminology itself?
You know what? I don't care if they call it raccoon, just do it, right? Because at this point, we're having conversations about semantics and we're not addressing the real issue. I think defund the police is what was done in Jersey. And I think the term came from a police department who actually did it. And I think it's shorter for social media. And I think that that's why the phrase took on. But of course, it gets hijacked by the people who are, you know, on the have opposing views because they don't understand. And then we have to take into account that when we talk about our country being uneducated, not just in Black and brown communities, I'm talking about the entire country having a subpar education system. When you have teachers using their own personal money to buy the things that they need for the classrooms, you know that we are talking about people who are having conversations that don't have all of the information. Should we call it restructuring the police? Sure. If that's going to make it happen, I don't care what they call it. Nobody is trying to get rid of the police. Let's talk about it. Let's be honest about it. A lot of police officers are blue collar workers in this country. They're underpaid, they're overworked, right? When you talk about these big amounts of dollars that people are getting, you're talking about the higher level in the police department. A lot of us saw The Wire, so we know that it goes up, right? Because The Wire was an education to how it worked in Baltimore, and you multiply that times every single marginalized community in the country. The truth is that these cops, many of them are not properly trained. They're not properly paid. They're overworked. They are deployed into communities that they are foreign to. Some of them are not on the job. One of the guys on the George Floyd case was a cop for 2 weeks, and was there when this happened, confronted and challenged by a superior who made a decision, and then his community because he's biracial. So when we talk about defunding the police, there's a young man that Ben Crump put on his page, a 12-year-old white boy who was autistic, and they called the police, and then he's in the hospital because cops are not therapists, they're not psychiatrists, they're not psychologists. They are there to deal with crime. Now, when you talk about sending police officers to deal with someone with a $20 counterfeit bill versus someone who's robbing a 7-Eleven with a gun and shooting people, don't those look like two very different situations? So they should have two very different approaches to handling the situations. And the problem is that in our communities, they go with the same approach for every single situation. So if we're not going to deal with the reality, which is that white supremacy reigns supreme in this country, then if we want to work on one thing, and that is violence, police violence. Do you understand that people don't realize that it was not a law against the law for police to do what they do to Black people at a certain point in our history? There was a time where they could do whatever they wanted to do to Black people without any consequences. And now you're asking an organization whose origination was to do what it's doing now, which is against the law, to transform its DNA. They were designed to catch Mexicans when they were coming here, to put Black people in line during Jim Crow era. Our greatest leaders we all have pictures of Martin Luther King getting beat up with bruises from the police. Those are our heroes that we have to look at being, subject and victim of police violence, which was fine. There were no consequences for that at that time. So how do we deal with this? Nobody wants to get rid of the police. Nobody wants to take food off of law enforcement's table. But we have to stop feeding the rhetoric that they're not beholden to rules. And the other thing is, I'm tired of people saying that, these cops saying it is my job to get home safe. No, it is your job for me to get home safe, because your job is to protect and serve the community. It is not your job to make it home alive. You signed up to be law enforcement. That is part of the job. You hear a doctor here saying, I gotta be safe, but she's not saying, you know what, I'm gonna let these COVID people die because it is my job to get home safe to my family. She understands the risk that she takes as being a doctor going into these emergency rooms dealing with COVID patients. So I don't understand why the rules change for law enforcement in this country, because they have a relationship with law enforcement, which is also unfair to law enforcement, because when we say Black Lives Matter, we're talking about police officers too, who are also being silenced by the violence and the supremacy within their own organizations. So defund the police means restructuring it, creating resource teams that can go out and deal with the issues of mental health. So you don't have so many people who are having mental health breakdowns getting murdered by cops. It will also make the police officers' jobs a lot easier when they can just focus on what they signed up for. And we could afford to properly train them when you go to barber school longer than you do to be a cop in America. So, and bartender school, the requirements are far more stringent. And I know that their jobs require a lot, but if their jobs require a lot, shouldn't the training?
All right. Thank you very much for those comments. I mean, I don't know what else to say behind that, but that was pretty passionate, and I appreciate everything that you said. You know, when I was in Louisville, Kentucky for the Breonna Taylor case, it was very tense. There were a lot of tense moments. And although we had plainclothes bodyguards with our crew 24/7, we still encountered police there. And some of the younger officers were a lot more aggressive than the veteran officers that were there. So, I recall, Dr. Milo, you mentioning the fact that you had an experience as a teenager with police. What de-escalation strategies do you believe should be implemented to decrease police violence around the country, especially with your own experience with police?
Ooh, yes, Lord. So I think, let's see how I want to answer this. I was coming home from the movies with my mom, and the first police officer on the scene pulled us over. It was late at night, didn't have lights on our bikes. And first officer pulled us over, started asking us questions, kind enough. The dude actually started to flirt with my mom and like, oh, what movie was it? Did you like the movie? Da-da-da. Have you seen this? And I'm like, all right, this is weird. And then the second officer pulls up, and he's literally the example of the bad cop, the good cop, bad cop. So he comes over to me directly. Now, granted, my mom is Italian-American. Like I said, I'm biracial. So he comes up to me and he starts directly interrogating and harassing me. Doesn't even look at my mom. But I'm over here, I have a hoodie on, and then on top of my hoodie, I have a purple shark helmet. But clearly I'm the threat because purple shark helmets are threatening, go figure. So he starts harassing me and says, like, you know, he's starting to pat me down and says, like, do you have anything sharp in your pocket, like guns, knives, or bazookas in your pocket? I'm like, really, guy? So I, you know, get patted down in a very, very inappropriate, almost assaulting way in front of my mom. So in terms of de-escalating, a lot of times, if we're thinking globally, not just from my example there, but a lot of times, to Ida's point earlier, the police shouldn't actually even be called in the first place. If there's a mental health concern, if there's a concern for somebody's wellness and well-being, the police shouldn't be called, because that's like calling me to go try to help somebody have heart surgery. I'm a psychologist. I'm not medically trained. So why would you call a psychologist, even though I'm a doctor, to try to help a situation? So de-escalation actually starts with understanding what has been a theme of our discussion so far on this panel today, of understanding the proper amount of resources. You don't send somebody in to do a job that they're not trained for. So it's not even just situational, it's the entire system being able to take a step back and say, like, we need to really allocate the right system to help de-escalate and to help solve this problem. When we're talking about defunding the police, again, that's about de-escalating, because Ben & Jerry's, which I'm a big fan of strawberry cheesecake for the record, so it's almost like you have this big old thing of ice cream. And the ice cream is all of the resources that are available. And for the most part, we've had billions and billions of dollars in this bucket. And the majority of that has gone to militarizing the police. So instead, if we're thinking about all of the resources in this awesome bucket of ice cream, how about we give some of that to actually fortifying and providing strong education? How about we give that to mental health training and education? How about we give that to different social workers? So de-escalation actually starts with having the proper resources in the first place. And then if we think about the experiences that I had, we would know that a 15-year-old trying to get home with his mom riding their bikes doesn't need to be assaulted after when they're just trying to get home. So de-escalation is a small portion of what systemically is rotten to its core.
All right, thank you, Dr. Dodson. You know, when the pandemic started, the police department, they had the lull in crime, then all of a sudden it exploded, and then they realized it was because people were at home with each other, and the mental health aspect of it increased. And Dr. Legree, if you could take this question, are there adequate mental health services to effectively respond to mental health during the pandemic? We have a little bit less than 5 minutes before we go to the chat room, but I want to at least get that in. What do you think about that?
One two-letter word, no. It's abysmal, really. There's a shortage at baseline of mental health providers. And then the mental health providers that are out there, and Dr. Milo can speak to this more as well, because there's a shortage, there's a waiting list. And then there's the issue of insurance. And for a lot of people in our community, there are people who don't have insurance. And so you don't have a lot of mental health providers who do pro bono care or who work at county facilities or who are in the community. And so it's a huge problem starting from the ground up. And with respect to police officers, I mean, Ada hit the nail on the head. You know, you can't have the same approach to the same person. It's just like being a physician. I can't have the same approach to every patient. Every patient is different. I have to approach every patient differently. And patients with mental illnesses, such as autism, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, I can't speak to them like I do a patient who doesn't have either of those disorders. There are some people with autism who, if you get too close to them too fast, it sets them off, because autism is based upon routine, is based upon calmness, is based upon serenity, is based upon not a lot of bright lights or loud noises. So when those police officers approached Elijah McClain in Denver, they persuaded him to act out in what they perceived was a violent way, when really he was acting out in self-protection, because and I'm not saying he had the diagnosis of autism, but based upon clinical signs and symptoms from observation, I can call it when I see it. Had he been approached differently, his response would have been different, and the reaction would have been different from the police. He wouldn't have been viewed as a threat. So it's things like that that Ada was talking about, where there's training on all fronts. If you are expected to engage in people who have mental health issues, you need to be able to understand how to approach them, because that would be a number one way to avoid senseless killings with respect to police and people of color. Number two, with respect to the actual sort of police themselves, Ada hit it on the head again. I mean, she's been amazing during this panel with respect to where the police originated from. I mean, in the 1700s, these sort of groups of men were originated to basically chase down runaway slaves. And then subsequent to that, in the 1800s, they were formally called the police to basically capture immigrants, people who migrated to the country who weren't born in the country. And so you have an infrastructure, like Ada said, whose origin stems from hate, stems from oppression, stems from violence, really. And so it's almost like you have to deconstruct or defund the platform upon which the infrastructure was built in order to get any changes. And then when you talk about the actual police forces themselves, I can use the analogy of being a physician. You know, I can't take care of a patient and intubate a patient for surgery unless I have been trained. If I just sort of put a stick down the hole, so to speak, a stick in the mouth, I can damage some things. Same thing like things that are trained during police training. You know, a knee on the neck. If you're going to put a knee on the neck to subdue a person, I'm not knocking the process. What I'm knocking is you need to know what's in the neck so that when you put your knee on the neck, you know what damage that you could possibly be causing. For example, if you put your knee on someone's neck or you put your hand on someone's neck in a chokehold in a certain way, either on the left or the right side, you're compressing a major artery to the brain called the carotid artery, which can cause immediate death or can cause seizures. If you put your knee too hard on the front of the neck, you can compress the trachea, which can cause suffocation. So all these things that are used to subdue people with respect to police force, I can guarantee that a lot of them probably don't know what they're compressing and how hard the compression is that can lead to death. So it's all about education, it's all about approach, and it's all about destructuring what the original reason for the police force was in order to kind of defund it.
All right, excellent remarks. We want to remind you again that we encourage you to utilize our chat feature to ask questions of our panelists. And before we go to the chat room, I'm going to ask all the panelists if they will just put a hand up. If we could see all our panelists and if they will put a hand up, I want to do a quick survey. If we could show all our panelists. I'm going to move out the way here. Okay, so if you will, put a finger down if you know someone since the pandemic started that probably needs mental health services. Put a finger down if you know someone who has been impacted by violence since the pandemic started. And put a finger down if you know of someone who's had an unfriendly encounter with police since the pandemic started. My point exactly. You can do that same survey with your friends to find out exactly where they are. And if you know someone that needs mental health services, we encourage you to make sure that you reach out to them to get that help. We will now turn our attention to the IMHC Chat Command Center for our first question.
Hi, thank you, Steve. We do have some questions coming in. I'm monitoring our YouTube chat. So the first question we have is for Dr. Milo Dodson, and he wants to know how you feel, do you feel that domestic violence in the increase has surfaced due to the pandemic, meaning that it was already there dormant, then surfaced during the pandemic? What are your thoughts on that?
So the question is about domestic violence surfacing more so during the pandemic. Dr. Milo?
I am so sorry. Similar to what Ida just shared, Erica had cut out, and so I didn't hear the question. Could they repeat it?
Okay, the question is, has domestic violence basically been dormant and has surfaced more so during the pandemic since it started in March?
No, domestic violence has always been a concern. I think it's just similar to police killing black people. It's just something that's been highlighted and increased in terms of the awareness during the pandemic. So I think part of the connection there is that the research shows that even when people are within the same quarters or in the same place for longer periods of time, i.e. sometimes around the holidays, that's when rates of domestic violence also increase. So it hasn't necessarily been dormant, it's been continuous, and because of the circumstances, it's just continued to increase. We can make the same type of argument, we can highlight the same type of observation, like I said, as, you know, sometimes people are saying, well, police are killing people at a higher rate, or we're seeing more violence that way. It's always been there. Racism had always been alive and well that way as well. It's just now being captured more often on video and perpetuated through social media.
All right, thank you, Dr. Milo. Jake is in the command center with our next question.
Thanks, Steve. Before the question, I want to highlight one of the comments. One of our viewers said, Ida Rodriguez for Congress. So if you're considering a political career, I think you would have our viewers' support. With that being said, Victoria Ballard asked, violence will always be a major issue in our communities. Regarding this comment, what can our viewers do to help produce better outcomes for ethnic and minority communities? And the question is open to the whole panel.
Okay, panel, the question is basically, what can people do to help reduce violence in the minority communities?
We got to talk about resources. It's all economics, right? The way you reduce violence is to increase resources because, you know, when we kill each other, it is a mental health issue usually that is connected with us not being able to deal with our anger and our frustration. When we steal, it's because we are either, you know, lacking of resources or trying to meet a standard of self-worth and value that has been imposed on us by this capitalistic and materialistic society that we live in. When we teach our children that their value comes from wearing Jordans and that it is important for them to have nice clothes. That's not because we're born superficial and our priorities are not in order. It's because it's been embedded in our psyche that in order for us to be worth something, we have to look a certain way or own certain things. And that is not specific to just minority communities. We're just the only ones that are charged with the audacity of it based on people not believing our worth, because nobody criticizes, you know, the Kardashians or anybody else for being materialistic. They're white women. They are well entitled to have Gucci. But then it's this, how dare you black and brown people buy Gucci over having a nice apartment or a nice house? Well, it's easier to buy some Jordans than it is the house. You can't use the money for Jordans for a substantial down payment. So I think that violence is a direct connection to what is missing in our communities, and the way we lower violence is by increasing resources and being honest about that. We came up with $1 trillion like this for political reasons. We have all kinds of bombs. We saw a robot go out and destroy Dallas in pursuit of one man who shot at police officers. So we do have money and we do have resources. What we have is a gross misappropriation of funds in Washington. And that is why we have such a high crime rate, because believe it or not, crime is very profitable for these people because it keeps black and brown people in prison as slaves, committing there's a lot of business. There's AT&T and all of the companies that are making money off of phone calls. Now you can video conference with a prisoner. There is free labor that is being committed. You get social services when you have them serving as firefighters. Now we're going to talk about this. Let's really talk about it. The truth is that we cannot talk about lowering violence unless we really talk about economics in this country, because the greatest oppression that we endure is economic oppression. That is how these communities are structured in a way to keep us like rats on a wheel. So the way we lower violence is by increasing resources and investing money in black and brown communities.
All right, thank you, Ida. Again, our panelists have agreed to allow us to post their social media handles so you can reach out to them on social media for further discussion. We'd like to thank our attendees for submitting their questions, and thank you again to our amazing panelists for their valuable input on this challenging but much needed discussion. Again, we appreciate you participating in the in this virtual luncheon. IMHC have held 5 virtual town hall meetings across Indiana over the past month leading up to today's luncheon. Radio personality B. Swift from Hot 96.3 blessed those in attendance as the town hall mayor and moderator. At this time, B. Swift will provide a summary on the topics and discussion surrounding this year's town hall meetings.
What's going on, Scoop? How are you today? Well, listen, I did 5 town halls, and these town halls were out of Indianapolis, which is central Indiana. We did Evansville, we did Northwest and Northern Indiana, and then we did one in Spanish that I wasn't a part of. But the things that I learned in each town hall were they all went together. One, unemployment rate after COVID, or during COVID, should I say, is through the roof. Youth need to be the forefront. There are not a lot of youth programs in cities. The youth don't have anything to do. People want to figure out how to create programs, because now we've been in the house 6 months, 7 months, and the youth have become idle. They've become bored, and you've seen an uptick in youth violence. And one thing that everybody said together was, when COVID kicked off, regardless of the age range, violence kind of slowed down for a little bit. But then as we got into that second or third month being on lockdown, the uptick was created and the violence got heavier. I know in Evansville, they talked about how gun violence per se. If you get caught with a gun in Evansville, regardless of if the serial numbers is scratched off, if it's stolen, whatever, you go to jail, but you can get out of jail on $100 or $200 fine. And I thought that was crazy, because in Indianapolis it's not that easy, but in Evansville it is. Another thing, and this was heavy in the Black community along with the brown community, since COVID, domestic violence has went up, and our friends in the brown community, they're scared of the police. They're scared to tell the police what happens, because they don't really speak the language per se. So they feel like, hey, if I tell the police that my husband is abusing me in front of my kids, then they might take them to jail, but they might not in a lot of instances, because they don't understand. So they're just letting them go back in the house, and it's taking a situation that just happened and making it bigger, because now the husband or whoever it was that was doing the abusing feels some type of way because the police was called. They didn't go to jail, so now they feel a different type of way, and now they take that abuse to another level, and not just on the parents sometimes, it's on the kids, because the kids are the one who can speak English, and they're having to translate, and the kids feel some type of way, oh, I'm telling on my dad, I'm telling on the boyfriend, and they don't go to jail, I'm stuck here with them. What happens to me? So you heard this in every conversation. You also heard about mental health. I think listening to this panel, and they haven't been on the calls with me. They haven't been on the town halls. Everything they've said has been said in the town halls with me. Mental health through the roof. Us as Black community, we already don't like going to doctors, but then go to a doctor to tell a doctor how we feel, what's going on in our house. That's not even cool in our community, you know what I mean? And people aren't doing that. And I can say that as somebody who's been in the house for 6 months. Only place I go is home and work. My mental isn't right. I need help. I'm tired of looking at the same 8 walls, 4 at home, 4 in this radio station, you know? And we don't know how to reach out to those people like, hey, can you help me? Can I just have a conversation for an hour a week just to get things off? So, you know, and these are things that's going on in every city. Again, along with the violence uptick, along with the guns, along with the youth having idle time on their hand. And I guess, you know, they say idle time is a devil's playground, and you're starting to see that because you see the numbers going up. Indianapolis, as of yesterday, it might have changed, but I think we were 1 murder away from our number last year. So we're going, our numbers is through the roof this year. And you're seeing that in every community because of COVID, because it's nothing to do, because nothing is open, because the centers are closed, because you can't have 25 kids in a room where this is their safe haven. This is a parent's safe haven. This is in the Latino community. You know, the police is coming. They don't have somebody to talk to them. The police is coming, and you're hearing this word defunding. And a lot of people, they say defund, but they really want to restructure. And instead of having the police pull up to everything, why can't a mental health person pull up to be able to talk to this victim, you know, or talk to this person and de-escalate a problem before it's taken through the roof? So COVID has definitely showed a lot. And the Black communities, the brown communities had already been at the bottom of the list. But thanks to COVID, we've gone below the list. And we're not getting the help that we should have, that we need to have, and that we weren't getting in the front place. So I think the doors and the windows and the eyes are all open and paying attention. And we just have to figure out how we can do it and help each other do it. And you know, in our communities, we're a village at one point, especially when I was growing up, the neighbor could scold me and maybe even whoop me. And we have to get back to that. Especially with dealing with the police, we have to police our own communities, and not saying that don't call 911, but we have to be there just in case, because if we know, hey, the neighbor got this problem. We can call 911, but it might take the situation here when it's not that deep. Just simple conversation can leave it here and we can fix it, because if they come, they're not trying to hear, oh, he's off his meds, he's violent. We just got to figure out how to fix the problem. And that was what I've learned. Like, we want to figure out how to help our community, get the police chiefs on board, get the mayors on board, get these local grassroots organizations really locked in and a part of everything, but also have the support of the city and of the state and of those who control things. So that was pretty much the takeaway. I'm happy IMHC let me be a part of it, because I learned so much about not only my community but surrounding areas, and it just puts us all in a better place, including myself, to be able to figure out ways to help or to send services that I might know of to certain people, because we're all affected in the same way. And I think, with COVID, it's taking it 20 times higher than what we knew.
All right, thank you, B. Swift. And, one of the things I like about B. Swift is the fact that when he started at the radio station, he was playing music, and all of a sudden he allowed people in our community to use his radio show as a platform, and he started listening to the community, and that is extremely important. B. Swift, you're more than just about music, you're about making an impact in our community. We appreciate that. Please tune in to B. Swift on Hot 96.3 to hear more from this young man who is doing things in our community to help change our community. While IMHC continues to fulfill their mission of eliminating health disparities through research, advocacy, and working to increase access to care services in minority communities, we recognize that this undertaking is one which involves bringing together our communities to properly address, investigate, and most importantly, act on behalf of the people that we proudly serve. It is my pleasure to introduce right now Indiana State Representative Greg Porter to share with you IMHC's call to action.
Hello. I'm the State Representative Greg Porter here in Indianapolis, House District 96. You just witnessed something that occurred across the airways in regards to this virtual luncheon. It was educational, informative, and they gave you some words for challenges. The Indiana Black Legislative Caucus, along with the Indiana Minority Health Coalition, has come together with these town hall meetings to look at some justice reform within our communities. Justice reform in regards to accountability, saving lives for individuals throughout our community, a culture change within the police department, again, and transparency. Those are the pillars that's going to be important for us in the upcoming legislative session. Under the direction of Representative Shackelford and Representative Harris, our chair and vice chair, we've come up with some very monumental change agent movements that's going to happen within the community. But you know what? It can only happen with your help. We need you to come down to the State House. We need for you to be engaged of this upcoming session. It's a long session. It's a budget session. It's a session that we're going to, each and every one of us can be some real change agents when it comes to our love and understanding of what we have to do within our community. The time is now. COVID has unleashed a lot of things in our community, but this is the time. This is our opportunity that we have to be able to come together and work together in regards to addressing the needs of mental health and all the systemic changes that we need to have within our community. So when IMHC come to your doorstep, from Jeffersonville up to Gary, from Richmond to Terre Haute, we have to all garner our souls, garner our strength to come together, to come to the State House and be advocates. You are an advocate. We all have opportunities to do some great things. Today, we engaged in conversations. We embraced what was going to be said, and now we have to implement what was said today. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus and the Indiana Minority Health Coalition, we look forward to being with you to bring your light to the State House in 2021.
Thank you, Representative Greg Porter. We want you all to stay encouraged during these trying times. Please take a moment to listen to this and be encouraged. I have that song in my playlist. It's one of my favorites. We hope you're encouraged today to make a change in someone's life. I would like to thank our IMHC Luncheon planning team, panelists, guest speakers, choir, local Minority Health Coalition affiliates, and community-based organization partners. But most of all, we'd like to thank you for being part of this event today. Know that your support of IMHC is greatly appreciated. We hope to see you again next year. To close out our luncheon today, IMHC President and CEO Carl Ellison would like to share a few last words with you.
Well, what can I say except it's been a wonderful, wonderful first virtual event for IMHC. So I just want you to give a thumbs up, a virtual thank you to Steve Scoop Jefferson for his wonderful lead of our program, and then also thank Greg Porter. Greg's been our partner for a long time. We appreciate the Black Caucus and love to work with him. And also Milo. Milo and I share Notre Dame roots. And Milo, by the way, so you know, I got my mask. Dr. Legree, I got my mask, and we hope everyone that's watching this will also make sure they have their mask to help protect us all. Also, I want to thank Aida, Dr. Legree, and of course DJ Swift, our town hall mayor, who is part of our team now to help us, ask you to help us reach out into our communities and to address violence. This is something that we can and must do. Finally, remember to give us some feedback. This is the first time we've done this virtually, and yeah, we had a few technology flaws, but we want your feedback. We want to know what you think about both the topic and our production of it. And we're also hopeful that 1 year from now, on September 22nd, 2021, that we'll see you in person at the Willows in the Broadway area of Indianapolis, or if not, we may see you virtually again. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been our pleasure to be your company during this time.